Здравствуйте, товарищи. Welcome back to Russian Through Propaganda. Today's day 65, and we're continuing today with the genitive. Right now that we've added the genitive plural, we're going to review a major use of the genitive, namely in expressing quantity. And remember that for the genitive, the rule of thumb when it comes to when do we use the genitive in Russian is that a Russian genitive will almost always translate nicely into English using of. Right, so that could include possession, right? The book of the student, which of course we would normally say the student's book, but we could say the book of the student, right? That of the student would be expressed not with a preposition in Russian, but with simply the genitive case ending, right? Книга студента, for example. And when it comes to today's topic, quantity, right? We also use of usually in English, right? Like a cup of coffee, or a kilogram of apples or whatever, right? So measurements, containers, anything like that that expresses quantity using of in English, we get the genitive in Russian. So let's review this quickly. Just reviewing the genitive generally. One kind of extreme case, I guess you could think of it this way, is non-existence, right? If you don't have any of something, right? If it doesn't exist at all, we get, as we know, niet plus the genitive. That may be one way to think about why we're getting the genitive in this construction, which probably seemed very strange when you first encountered it. Right, niet plus the genitive, у меня нет машины, I don't have a car. У меня нет мороженого. Now there we have something we can measure, and you see how now we could say that this is simply a non-existence construction, but we could also think of it in a sort of quantitative fashion, right? And in English we could say, I don't have any ice cream. Right, now, if we kind of extend that idea, right, to any other expression of quantity, we get the same genitive usage, right? Сколько у нас вина? How much of wine do we have? Right now, here in English, we normally don't use of. We say how much wine. But again, if we do throw in an of, it makes the Russian, I think, that much more obvious, right? How much of wine? Сколько вина у нас, right? У нас столько вина. There's the demonstrative equivalent of сколько, right? We have a question word that has a K, and we're going to talk more about this later, by the way, its demonstrative counterpart, meaning we're pointing out something, we're showing, and those typically replace the K with the T, right? A T. So from сколько we get столько. Сколько means how much, right? A question word, and столько means so much, right? У нас столько вина, we have so much wine, or more literally, so much of wine. Other expressions you've heard already probably, много, немного, мало. У нас есть много вина, we have a lot of wine. У нас есть немного водки, right? We have not much of wine, so a little bit. Or we have little beer. У нас мало пива. Много вина, немного водки, мало piva, right? So look at that last one, for example. Little of beer. I guess we could translate that literally. Mala means a little or little, right? Not much. Mala piva. Okay, so all those nouns are in the genitive. Okay, anyway, I think this is fairly obvious. Now remember that много and mala can also be used not so much with quantities, but as adverbs, right? Do you do something a lot, or do you do it little? У меня так много работы, I have so much work, so much of work, or a lot of work. Я очень много работаю, I work a lot, right? I work a great deal, очень много. Okay, so there the много is just an adverb modifying работаю, telling how much you work. Now with мало, у него очень мало книг, he has very few books. Он мало читает, he reads little, right? Мало there in the second sentence modifying читает. How much does he read? Мало. Okay, now what about comparing and qualifying quantities, right? To be a bit more specific, больше and меньше are the basic forms here. Больше means more, меньше means less. These are both comparative forms, and we're going to talk more about comparative forms generally soon. But these also, again, they're expressing quantities, right? More of something, less of something, so they'd be followed by a noun with the genitive. У меня больше работы, чем у вас. Now note the чем, that's like English than, used to complete the comparison. У меня больше работы, чем у вас. Я работаю больше в этом году, чем в прошлом. Right, I work more in this year, literally, than in last year, right? Than last year. Okay, so again, you see there, just like много and мало, right? Больше and меньше can express quantities with the noun and the genitive, or they can be used adverbially, right? How much are you working this year? Well, less. More this year than last year. Okay, what about меньше? У нас меньше водки, чем вина. We have less of vodka than of wine, right? Now again, adverbially, мои друзья работают меньше, чем я. Now, we can throw in some additional adverbs to qualify these quantities, right? Слишком means too, with two O's. Гораздо means a lot or much. So, for example, у тебя слишком много or слишком мало, right? You have too much or too little. And then we get работы, right? Genitive. Too much of work, too little of work. Гораздо. У нас теперь гораздо больше or гораздо меньше вина. Now we have much more or much less of wine, right? Genitive. And what about none at all? Вообще means, it's a word that means sort of something like generally, or here in this negative sense, we could translate it using at all. And we're going to talk a lot more about this word in book 3, by the way. У нас нет водки вообще, right? We have no vodka whatsoever, none at all. Or никакой, right? Just a negated, the question word какой, right? What kind of? Well, никакой, no kind of. And this is also used quite often in expressions like this. У нас никакой водки не было, right? We didn't have any vodka whatsoever. Or kind of taken a bit more literally, we had vodka of no kind, right? We no vodka whatsoever of any description. Okay, let's look at a poster quickly. This is one of the anti-alcoholism posters. Some of them are very rather graphic. Последнее предупреждение, right? Final warning. Стой, stop. Последнее предупреждение, final warning. Okay, so we could say, just to add a little caption here with some quantities, этот человек пьет слишком много алкоголя, right? This person drinks too much of alcohol, right? Too much alcohol. Гораздо больше, чем надо, right? A lot more than is necessary, or than one should drink. Как говорится, пить надо меньше, right? As they say, or as it is said, it is necessary to drink less. Translating that literally, right? That's just kind of a phrase. It's, you hear it in this famous movie, Ironie судьбы, for example. Anyway, it means just, lay off the alcohol. Пить надо меньше. Okay, let's translate a few sentences just expressing quantities. He has a lot of clothes. У него много одежды, right? Одежда, as we know, is singular in Russian, right? He has a lot of clothing. Много одежды. He has more clothes than she does. Okay, now we're comparing, right, with больше. У него больше одежды, чем у нее. Right, so literally at him is more of clothing than at her, right? У него больше одежды, чем у нее. Два, we don't have much food and we have no beer whatsoever. У нас мало, so let's use little, right? We have little food. У нас мало еды. И нет пива вообще, right? Нет пива вообще. We have no beer whatsoever. Right? Three, they have a lot less homework than we do. Okay, homework is домашняя работа. We now know that that's a soft adjective, right? So у них, right, they have, у них, a lot less, гораздо меньше. Гораздо меньше, now we need a genitive, домашней работы, чем у нас. 4, I read more in Russian than in English. Я читаю больше по-русски, чем по-английски. I read too many books, слишком много, right, too many. Я читаю слишком много книг. Again, we could read that more literally as too many of books, right? The thing we're counting, or the in this case, books, right, is going into the genitive. Okay, let's look very quickly at just issues of verb agreement. This is kind of a somewhat tricky topic, but let's just look at it briefly. Remember that non-existence expressions are neuter singular. The verbs in let me back up. Non-existence expressions are subjectless. That's what I meant to say. And we know that subjectless expressions don't have a subject. And that means that if they have a verb included, then the verb is always neuter singular, even though we don't have even a neuter singular subject, right? So we've been through this, actually just recently we reviewed it. Okay, so again, look over the verbs here. У нас нет водки, у нас не было водки. We can see не было, that's clearly neuter singular. У нас нет, sorry, future, у нас не будет водки. Okay, now something similar happens when we have quantities here with genitive expressions like много, for example. У нас есть много водки, right? So the subject here is много, right? A lot of something. We have sort of this quantity as our subject. And in cases like that in Russian, we get neuter nouns, neuter verbs, basically. У нас было много водки, right? We had a lot of vodka. У нас будет много водки. Okay, I think that makes pretty good sense, right? It's obviously not going to be plural because we have a non-count noun. We're just, the subject is basically a quantity. It's not a number of, various plural items. Okay, now let's, of course, these expressions like with много can also be used as direct objects. For example, она купила много вина, she bought a lot of wine. Мы говорили о многом. Now this is somewhat more, well, not quite as common, but многие can be used adjectively, and it's really almost never seen in this form многие, because again, instead you would just say много. But in instances where you need an oblique case form, like in this case, we talked about a lot, right? A lot of stuff. Well, we need prepositional. We basically need много to serve as the prepositional case object of о, right? In that case, we use it basically as a hard adjective. Мы говорили о многом. Okay, another example with the dative, я многому научился, right? I've learned a lot. Now you may remember that's a very bizarre use of the dative. It's really the opposite of what we would expect, and that's very weird even for Russian. We're literally saying something like, I was taught to a lot or something. We're getting this dative. So anyway, that's unusual. You could review that if you wanted to. We talked about it at some point back in book 1. Okay, at any rate, we need a dative, right? Basically the dative form of многое, right? A lot of stuff, or again, we could just simply think of it as много. And so here we use it as basically a hard adjective. Я многому научился. Now you may see this used in the nominative plural, многие, meaning many people. Многие говорят, что это так. Okay, so again, that's somewhat of a specialized topic there, but I threw it in just because you will hear things like that. Okay, let's talk some more about quantities with count and non-count nouns. We introduced this back a little bit the other day. And essentially, if we say that a noun is a count noun, and you may hear this in other languages you study, it just means that it can be counted, right? So a very obvious explanation, right? A count noun is something that can be counted. A non-count noun is something that typically would not be counted. And so it comes not in numbers, but in quantities. So an obvious example would be liquids, right? You don't ask how many waters you have, you ask how much water, right, in the singular. Okay, so the only thing to add about this really is that these don't always line up across languages, right? One language may treat a word as a non-count noun and another won't, right? So let's look over in Russian some non-count nouns. This means they're going to be singular only, and a lot of these are surprising, right? So of course, liquids in Russian are usually going to be non-count, as they would be in English, right? A lot of water. But a lot of other things like berries and grains, we're not really talking about grains here right now, but other things that are sort of granular. Maybe the most surprising example is potatoes. Like think of a sack of potatoes. You've got, that's sort of the way Russians think about it, at least grammatically, in the sense that kartoshka is usually used in the singular. We'd call it a singular only noun. By the way, there are ways to say like a single potato. It would be a different noun. I don't want to get into that today, right? But there are ways to say that if you want to. But for now, let's just keep it simple and look at the singular only nouns. Kartoshka, right? So feminine singular. So for example, if you say I want potatoes, you say я хочу картошку, right? I want to eat potatoes tonight. Морковь, carrots, горох, peas, luk, onions, kapusta, cabbage. Okay, so there's one that lines up with English, right? We say cabbage in the singular, just like in Russian. But onions, right? Luk, that's singular only in Russian, and that may strike us as weird. Peas, carrots, right? Okay, now some berries: malina, klubnika, chernika, smarodina. Smarodina, you can have black currants and red currants in Russian. They're really tasty. I'm sure some of you may not even know what that is. I think most probably do, but there's kind of an interesting story there if you want to Google it, that these currants, let me see if memory serves. I think in the US they were carrying some sort of fungus or something that was destroying pine. I believe it was pine forests back at the time when farming timber was a really big industry up in, at least I think in the Northeast. And so for that reason, basically people stopped cultivating currants. And so you don't really see them just all over the place here the way you do in Russia. But just give you a little personal example. I had my birthday the other day, on Valentine's Day, by the way. And my wife and I went to the Russian store, Net Cost, right? The wonderful Russian supermarket. And we got a Черная Smarodina birthday cake for me, right? With black currants. Okay, anyway, Yezhivika, blackberries. Okay, so you get the point, right? So this is just a sampling of some common nouns that are singular only in Russian. Of course, there are others. Okay, so let's look at a few others. Just examples. Много воды, a lot of water, right? Okay, so that's a liquid, that's obvious. Мало капусты, not much cabbage, little cabbage. Меньше сахара, less sugar. Okay, so sugar is another one that lines up with English, right? It's a granular thing. We don't think of it as something we can count, right? Меньше сахара. Now, if it's things we can count, like cars, students, words, then of course they would usually appear in the genitive plural and quantity expressions, right? Много машин, мало студентов, больше слов, and so forth. All right, let's just pick some quantities here, and we need to think, are these count or non-count, right? Do we need genitive singular or genitive plural? I gotta say, this is too much food. Это слишком много еды. Столько не съем, right? I will not eat so much. I can't eat so much. Okay, food, that makes sense, even from English, right? Food is non-count. Number two, I have so many books. Okay, so this is obviously something we can count. У меня так много книг, right? So much of books, genitive plural. Когда же я их все прочитаю? When will I read all of them? Three, my Russian friend has a great deal of red caviar. У моего русского друга очень много красной икры. Красной икры. Okay, so that makes sense too. Caviar in English, it's singular. It's something sort of granular that we can't count. Четыре, in our group there were many students, a lot of students. В нашей группе было много студентов. That's a count noun. Пять, I have more new clothing than you do. У меня больше новой одежды, чем у тебя. Okay, clothing. Of course, in English we say clothes, but we also have this word clothing, which matches up with the Russian in the sense that it's non-count. Of course, even the noun clothes, well, I should say plural, right? Clothes is plural, but I guess we'd also say it's non-count. We say we have a lot of clothes. We don't say I have 5 clothes. Oh, well, anyway, you get the point. Шесть, why do we have so little beer? Почему у нас так мало пива? Купи еще, right? Buy more. Семь, in the library there are too few large windows. Or we could say again, there aren't enough. В библиотеке слишком мало больших окон. Right? We can count windows, so genitive plural. Восемь, they they have no hot water whatsoever. У них вообще не было горячей воды. Sorry, it was past tense. They had no hot water whatsoever. Fairly recently, even in Russia, they used to turn off the hot water in summer for up to a month for what they called somewhat euphemistically prophylactica. And so basically you would be taking cold showers for several weeks each summer That's not quite as big of a deal anymore because most Russians now have their own little water heaters in their apartments, so this isn't quite as big of a problem as it used to be, but I definitely experienced that on many different occasions. Девять, in Russia, they drink less of Coke than they do here at us in America, so to speak. В России пьют меньше колы, чем у нас в Америке. Okay, that's a non-count. It's a liquid genitive singular. In my composition or in my paper, there are more words than in yours. Okay, words, that's a count noun. В моем сочинении больше слов, чем в твоем. Okay, let's see. Let's look at containers, portion, so just some vocab here. And again, any kind of container or measurement, you could follow that up with an of statement, right, in English, and that would, of course, give genitive in Russian. Порция рыбы, добавка рыбы, стакан молока, a glass of milk, чашка кофе, a cup of coffee. Remember, кофе doesn't decline. Кружка пива, бокал вина. Right, so note that a bakal is specifically a wine glass. So if you want to order wine in a restaurant, you would use bakal, not stakan. Бутылка воды, right, a bottle of water. Тарелка супа. A tarelka can be a plate. We usually think of it as meaning plate, but it can also mean a bowl, right? So it can kind of be either in Russian. There's another word, miska, which means a bowl specifically, but it's not really used that often. Okay, anyway, banka is a jar or a can. Banka varenya, a jar of jam. Rюмка, that's a shot glass. There are other words for that, but rюмка is one. Кусок is a piece of anything, really. Кусок мяса. And половина means half. So половина куска would mean half of a piece, for example. Okay, now if you're ordering foods at markets, food at markets, of course you would often ask people to weigh things out in terms of grams or kilograms. Now this isn't quite as common anymore unless, again, you go to an actual market as opposed to a supermarket or whatever. But actually, even in supermarkets, if you're ordering meat, like cold cuts or whatever, sausage, just whatever it may be, you'll go to a counter and ask for how many grams of cheese or sausage or whatever. Okay, of course, that would also be followed by genitive, right? Gram sira would be 1 gram of cheese, kilogram мяса, a kilogram of meat, liter воды, a liter of water or whatever. Another quick item, половина, we just saw means half, and that's often contracted to a little form pol when combined with other nouns to say like half of a bottle or a half liter, a half year or whatever. So you can watch out for these expressions. Polbutylki. Now note that because what we're literally saying here is something like half of a bottle, these forms often, basically they're appearing in the genitive, right? Even where, for example, on vypil polbutylki, of course, half a bottle is the direct object, but because we have this quantity idea baked into it, we don't get here an accusative ending usually. We would keep it in the, again, which is what is basically a genitive ending. On vypil polbutylki. Pol litra, half liter, here written with a hyphen in front of the L. That's just a little spelling detail. Дайте пол литра воды. Give me half a liter of water. Полгода would be half a year. Он полгода там жил, right? He lived there, or I lived there for half a year. Okay, last item today is one that's a little bit, it's not often noticed maybe necessarily. It doesn't maybe seem like a big deal, but it's very common. And so it's something to watch for when you're talking about food, right? Which is, of course, quite frequently the case, right? So, for example, you could ask a guest, хотите рыбу? Okay, that makes sense to us. Do you want fish, right? Well, you have fish. Do you want fish? And there we get the accusative of рыба. Now, listen for, again, it may seem a bit subtle. You might also hear хотите рыбы there with the genitive. Okay, we call that the partitive genitive. And it's kind of like in English, the difference between do you want fish or do you want some fish, right? So in English, we throw in some and we get across this idea of quantity, right? Do you want a little fish? Do you want some fish? Russian expresses that just simply with the with a genitive object instead of a accusative object. So хотите рыбы? Another example, молоко нужно купить, right? Do we need to buy milk? Or молока нужно купить? Do we need to buy any milk? Right, so not that big of a deal, I guess, because you could say either, but there is this slight difference in meaning. And again, when you're offering someone food, you very often get this partitive genitive. When you're offering food, when you're asking for some food, you get the partitive genitive. Maybe the most common little construction you see this with is with еще, right? Еще, you're asking for still of something, right? Some more of something, literally still of something with the partitive genitive. А можно еще рыбы? Right? That's a nice little way to ask for more fish. Can I have more fish? Okay, let's throw in some more genitive to just talk about amounts or to get across this idea of a partitive genitive. Ребенок съел одну порцию, right? One portion of meat, мясо, и выпил стакан воды, and he drank up a glass of water. Number 2, give me please 2 liters of milk and a jar of sour cream, творог. Дайте, пожалуйста, 2 литра молока и банку творога. By the way, you may hear tvarog. There are 2 possible stresses there. Most people I've met, I think they tend to say tvorog, but I have heard tvarog. Anyway, okay, 3. Okay, do you want caviar? Okay, so we could guess не хотите икру, right? Which would mean basically, do you want caviar? But I think more likely in most contexts would be, do you want some caviar, right? And we would get the partitive genitive, не хотите икры? Yeah, yes, I'd like some caviar and also a glass of wine. Да, и еще бокал вина. 4, give me 2 pieces of pizza and 1 portion of salad, 1 serving of salad. Дайте 2 куска пиццы и 1 порцию салата. 5, is there any more juice left, right? Okay, sounds like a partitive genitive, right? Do we have any more of juice? Там есть еще сока? Да, есть еще целая бутылка сока. Yes, there's still a whole bottle of juice. One last detail I'll throw out with partitive genitives is there's a kind of an alternate genitive ending for masculine nouns that's used specifically in this partitive meaning. So this is something we're not really studying actively right now, but it's definitely something to listen up for. And certain nouns in particular can take this ending and often do, again, when you're talking about an amount, right? A few common examples are сахар, sugar, народ, meaning people, like a lot of people, and tea also. So you could say, for a cup of tea, you could say чашка чая. That would be okay, I guess, but more often you would hear this special partitive genitive form with you, right? Чашка чаю. Now, to make matters a bit even more difficult, Russians often use diminutives for coffee and tea. The diminutive for tea is чаёк, and the diminutive of coffee is кофеёк. Now, you don't hear those nominative forms very often, but you do hear their partitive forms, again with this u genitive ending. So listen up for these expressions like чайку будешь, right? Meaning, would you like some tea, right? Partitive of this diminutive form from chai, чайок, чайку, чайку будешь. And for coffee, it would be кофейку. For example, хочешь кофейку, будешь кофейку, right? Do you want some coffee? Will you have some coffee, and so forth. Okay, so anyway, listen up for, again, masculine nouns that take u or you in this very special partitive use of the genitive. And again, as you learn more Russian, you'll just pick up on which words are often are used in that with that ending. Okay, anyway, that's it for today. Until next time, до свидания, товарищи. Вперед к новым победам.